In such a time as this, how do we most effectively work to build the better world that we dream about? One helpful place to turn is the book Practical Radicals: 7 Strategies to Change the World by Deepak Bhargava and Stephanie Luce. Bhargava is a longtime activist and organizer, as well as professor at the City University of New York School for Labor and Urban Studies. Luce is a professor of sociology at CUNY as well, and together they have distilled decades of experience into real-world ways of how can we, ordinary people, create extraordinary change in our world. As we take a brief tour through their 7 models, I invite you to keep in mind the Jungian idea of the golden shadow. Carl Jung's general notion of a shadow as part of ourselves that we repress because it feels negative or shameful or socially unacceptable, but that's only half of the story. We each also carry within us a golden shadow that is our positive, untapped gifts, talents, and capacities. You can often recognize your golden shadow when you find yourself admiring and idealizing a person beyond who they actually are. So like you recognize your other shadow by when you have this hyperbolic, exaggerated negative reaction to someone beyond what's really reasonable, because you're like, that reminds me of my dad or whatever. Our family can push our buttons because our family sewed on our buttons, and when other people do. So that's your shadow. You're having this exaggerated reaction because it's about something beyond. Your golden shadow is like that too. You're like so admiring this person because it's actually about something also within yourself beyond what they're bringing. And once you recognize that projection of yourself, it becomes a mirror reflecting back to yourself your own unrealized potential. So ask yourself, as we go through these 7 things, who do I deeply admire, especially for helping make the world a better place? What qualities do I see in them that I wished I possessed? And then remember that those traits you most fiercely admire in others are often already within you, waiting to be claimed and cultivated. Learning to recognize that golden shadow can help you manifest again those parts of yourself that this world, that we need most right now. So as we move through these 7 strategies, just notice within yourself if one of these, or maybe 1 or 2 of them, particularly resonate with you. By no means am I saying, go do all 7 of these things. Like, that's way too much. Notice which 1 or 2 really resonate with you. That inner nudge can be a clue pointing toward where you may be most called to act in such a time as this. So with that in mind, let's begin. Strategy number 1 is base building through community organizing or labor union. So community organizing, what Barack Obama did before becoming president, bringing together religious organizations or community organizations, or of course labor unions. So this might be for you if you particularly admire people like Ella Baker, Saul Alinsky, Cesar Chavez, A. Philip Randolph, Mother Jones. And reading about the lives of these activist ancestors can inspire us to do in our time and place what they did in theirs. Strategy number 2 is disruptive movements through strategic, nonviolent, non-cooperation. So major figures in this lineage: W.E.B. Du Bois, Bayard Rustin, who was the kind of behind-the-scenes person of like the March on Washington and things like that, the members of ACT UP during the height of the AIDS crisis. Disruption means identifying strategic choke points where collective action can interrupt business as usual until change becomes unavoidable. To get involved, if you're thinking like, what would that actually look like right now? That is what our Democracy Action Team is doing by getting involved with the larger 1 Million Rising movement. So if you want to learn more about that, please email our Democracy Action Team or visit their table in the atrium, or get in touch with them about getting involved with any of our action groups. Strategy number 3 is narrative shift. This is where natural-born storytellers and artists and educators and journalists can make a critical difference. Two recent examples come to mind. First, the Occupy Wall Street movement helped popularize that now familiar phrase, "We are the 99%." Reframing how millions of people understood economic inequality, that there is this vast gulf between the 99% and the wealth of the 1% and even the top 10% of the 1%, the 0.01%. By vividly contrasting again the immense wealth of the top 1% with the struggles of the rest of us, activists changed the national conversation about fairness, greed, and corporate power. In a similar way, the marriage equality movement transformed public opinion by changing hearts as well as minds through the courage of LGBTQ plus couples and families sharing their stories publicly. Neighbors and coworkers and loved ones came to see that love and commitment between same-sex partners are every bit as real and sacred as those in opposite-sex marriages. They are neither more nor less messed up than anybody else, right, than the rest of us, and should have equal access to marriage rights. And today we need a new narrative shift to confront what I can only call our era's robber barons. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, and a host of what we should be calling tech tycoons who are hoarding staggering wealth while workers struggle, while democracy erodes, and while our planet burns. Musk alone is projected, who saw this headline, to become the world's first trillionaire. Are you kidding me? Like, billionaires are a policy failure, much less trillionaires. That is a milestone that underscores the obscene concentration of wealth in the hands of single individuals. If it makes you want to sharpen your pitchforks, you are not alone. If I had all afternoon, I would re-preach my Labor Day sermon. It's in our archives, inspired by the prophetic book, Limitarianism. Suffice it to say, there is a strong argument for a 100% wealth tax, not an income tax, a 100% wealth tax on individuals with more than $10 million in wealth. As a starting point, I would be willing to make a compromise at $100 million for a 100% wealth tax. But I think limitarianism makes a strong case that 10 million is plenty for any one individual. And letting it be all at the top is what is keeping us from having a stable floor for all. You tax the rich, that's where the money is. Without limits, extreme wealth does exactly what it's doing now. It hollows out the common good, and it weakens our democracy. Strategy 4, electoral change. This is the nonpartisan, get out the vote work we do here at UUCF through our UU the Vote campaign. You'll be hearing more about it soon, but also in the fall especially, as well as the partisan political engagement that you may choose to take on personally that we can't do here at UUCF. Whether we're registering new voters, helping people get to the polls, advocating for legislation that reflects our UU values, electoral work remains one of the most direct ways that we turn our values into power. Strategy 5 is inside, outside, which focuses on building the broadest possible coalition to achieve policy change. So it's the opposite of kind of purity. So as the civil rights activist Bernice Johnson Reagan used to put it, if you are in a coalition and you are comfortable with everyone in that coalition, you are not in a broad enough coalition. This approach may be for you if you are gifted at building bridges across difference and able to work both inside established institutions and outside of them, pushing for change. Number 6 is momentum. This approach seeks to change what people think of as common sense, making possible what once seemed impossible. Who's old enough to remember when marriage equality seemed impossible until it suddenly wasn't? In political science, this is called shifting the Overton window, expanding the range of ideas that the public considers acceptable and achievable. 2 powerful examples come to mind: the Black Lives Matter movement. It transformed our moral and political landscape by naming systemic racism, both in general and specifically in policing, and demanding accountability. So through marches and art and social media and courageous truth-telling, BLM made millions of people see what had long been denied and forced issues of racial justice into our national conversation. Similarly, the Sunrise Movement has helped shift the conversation about climate change from this distant environmental concern to an urgent moral and especially generational crisis. By centering the voices of young people and insisting that a living planet is both a right and a responsibility, they made bold policies like a Green New Deal part of the mainstream political discourse. Momentum movements remind us that change often happens fast when imagination is allowed to outrun fear, and when people are brave enough to believe that another world is possible. Number 7 is collective care, also known as mutual aid. It's caring for one another in the meantime as we work to build a better world. It's about meeting immediate needs while building the relationships and resilience needed to sustain movements for the long haul. We have seen powerful examples of this recently as people across the country, as we right here at UUCF, have stepped up to support food pantries and community kitchens when so many of our neighbors have faced food insecurity due to the government shutdown. So notice as I've gone through these, or as you look at the screen, does one or more of these 7 strategies particularly resonate with you? If so, consider looking into more of the details that I mentioned, or perhaps reading or even listening to the audiobook, even just of the chapter, related to the strategy that would be maybe manageable. Just listen to that piece in Bargava and Lucci's book, Practical Radicals. We all have different gifts and callings, and none of us is called to do everything. But in the words of the late Congressman John Lewis, each one of us in every generation is called to do our part. For now, I want to end with a case study of how a small group of committed people facing circumstances that felt truly impossible still changed the world for the better. As I've reflected on historical movements that can potentially inspire us in such a time as this, the movement that has kept coming to my mind and heart is the ACT UP movement from in the midst of the height of the AIDS crisis. To learn more, I ordered Let the Record Show, A Political History of ACT UP New York from 1987 to 1993. It's by Sarah Schulman, a longtime activist and professor at the College of Staten Island. It's an extremely interesting book, and I ordered it just because I was like, I know I've read some of Sarah's books before, and I was like, I know she wrote a book about ACT UP, so I just ordered it, and it is more than 700 pages long. So when it arrived, I was like, what fresh hell is this? What is going on? But it's actually really, really interesting, so I do recommend it, even though I was like, whoa, what did I just get myself into? ACT UP, which stands for the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, was founded in March of '87. Through relentless protest, creative direct action, and brilliant strategy, they forced the U.S. government, the media, the pharmaceutical industry to respond to a crisis that they had too long ignored, saving countless lives and transforming our public understanding of AIDS. I don't have time right now to go into it, but some of you will just remember just the failure of leadership of Reagan, of Bush, how AIDS was first called GRIDS, gay-related immune deficiency. I'll get into this, how it was even denied that women could even get it. There's so much misinformation, so much confusion. So there's a lot to say. I want to limit myself just to the top 10 lessons that I took away from reading this, lessons to help us defend democracy, resist authoritarianism, and engage in the work of justice in our own time. And some of these are actually different from the conventional advice I would give to groups, even activists. These are the things you do when the house is on fire. Number 10. ACT UP is not a story of extraordinary people different from you and me. Dorothy Day used to say, don't call me a saint, don't dismiss me that easily. You could do this too, if you wanted to. It's the story ACT UP is of ordinary people rising to the occasion. So the question for us is, you have to ask this in your heart. What is your red line? I can't answer that for you, but what is your red line? What will move you to take action here and now as they did in their time? Even if it's just looking on that insert to your order of service or that Democracy Action Team link and saying, can I do even just one thing this week? Number 9, even a few highly motivated people can make a major difference. More is more sometimes, but a few highly motivated people can make a difference. Only a very small number of people were actively involved in ACT UP's direct action to end the AIDS crisis. At its height, ACT UP had about 500 to 800 people at a meeting. Their largest demonstration had only 7,000 people, but a few committed activists, when laser focused on being effective, can accomplish a lot. Number 8, expand your imagination beyond traditional protests. Too many demonstrations are limited to marching people around with signs and listening passively to speakers. ACT UP's most effective actions were creative, they were disruptive, and they were paradigm shifting. I'll share 3 examples near the end of this list. Number 7, don't get lost in abstract debates. Stay focused on what is the next right action and what's the next right action after that. ACT UP meetings maintained a laser focus on planning direct action to end the AIDS crisis. Skilled facilitators supported that focus, looking for the new voices, not just calling on the same person over and over again, and always moving the discussion toward action to make sure that repetitive circular conversations did not eat up valuable time. Who has never been in a meeting, never seen that happen, right? Never seen repetitive circular, yeah. Their goal was always momentum, not perfection. Never do an action in isolation. Always build momentum. Always point people to the next step. If somebody shows up for something, make sure they know what's the next thing they should be showing up to. Every event had a sign-up sheet. Capture people's email. Get their names. Or leaflets announcing further actions. Not wasting energy, effort, or goodwill. Anyone ever had their goodwill squandered when you showed up for something and you're like, this is not great? Not doing that was essential to being effective in a movement when people literally did not have time. Slide 5, or number 5. Consensus is not required. In general, I'm actually a big fan of consensus, but ACT UP never demanded full agreement on an action or campaign to be taken up. If I wanted to participate in an illegal needle exchange on the Lower East Side in order to get arrested and wage a test case at trial, and you didn't want to, you wouldn't stop me from doing it, you just wouldn't do it. If instead you wanted to organize a demonstration against the Catholic Church and I didn't want to, I simply wouldn't do it. In this way, many different expressions of direct action were carried out simultaneously, none of them requiring full consensus, total participation, or universal agreement that could have stopped the momentum. Number 4, silence equals death. These posters are the first of the 3 examples of ACT UP's bold creativity that confronted apathy and spurred urgency. So activists took that infamous pink triangle that the Nazis had, it was pointing downward, that was sewn onto the uniforms of gay men in concentration camps, and they took it and pointed it upward, thereby permanently connecting the AIDS crisis socially to the legacy of the Holocaust, but at the same time subverting it. The slogan, "Silence equals death," called out anyone choosing not to speak or act while thousands were dying. They then hired an underground mob-controlled company to illegally wheat paste 3,000 posters all across New York City, ensuring that the message was impossible to ignore. Women don't get AIDS, they just die from it. This now iconic ad is a second example of ACT UP's paradigm-shifting creativity. It shattered the myth that HIV was solely a, quote, gay man's disease and demanded that the CDC expand its narrow definition of AIDS, a definition that had denied thousands of women access to treatment, disability benefits, and clinical trials. Number 2, stop the church. December 10th, 1989. Does anybody remember this being in the news? This was a big deal. ACT UP staged its boldest and most controversial protest, a dramatic direct action on a Sunday morning at the world-famous St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And they didn't just do it outside, they went into the sanctuary and interrupted Mass. Confronting the Catholic Church's vocal resistance. The Catholic Church was opting in to being incredibly loud and vocal in being against condoms, against safer sex education, and being against LGBTQ rights in the middle of the AIDS crisis. At that time, the Vatican and the U.S. Catholic hierarchy were some of the most influential voices in our country, around the world, opposing condom distribution, opposing comprehensive sex education, positions that actively undermined HIV prevention efforts and were directly contributing to the mounting death toll. More than 7,000 protesters gathered, 111 were arrested, and images of activists interrupting a Sunday Mass made international headlines. Their message was stark. The sanctity of our lives is more important than the sanctity of a sanctuary. After the action, the author and activist Larry Kramer recalled the mood at the next ACT UP meeting. I remember going to the meeting after it. Everyone was terrified because it had been in the paper. Every editorial page in the country had dumped on us. People were scared. And I remember standing up and saying, "Are you crazy? They're afraid of us now. And that's the best thing that could ever happen to us." And it was true. It was like, what won't these people do if we don't meet their demands? Finally, number one, changing people. Strategic, nonviolent, direct action to change hearts and minds. This is a strategy at the heart of the 1 Million Rising movement that our own Democracy Action team is this larger movement across the country that they're participating in. So I want to close with the words of an ACT UP activist whose experience speaks directly to what it can take to change people, institutions, and systems. In his words, "I really believe that anyone can change. They can change because they want to change, or they can change because we force them to change. When you want to get people to come over to your side, you talk to them, you write to them, you confront them. But there's a certain point where they don't want to change, but you can force them to change, and that's where civil disobedience really comes in. To either make it impossible for them to do what they're doing and not change, or to make them at least really have to face you, face to face. Civil disobedience also makes people understand the seriousness of what you're doing. The most direct action is doing things like taking over someone's office. That is an order of magnitude more effective than blocking traffic outside their building. Make their life impossible to continue without you getting out of the way. So the more direct the action is, the closer it gets to you and the person you're trying to change or the institution you're trying to change, the better off you are. And the hardest thing in organizing any demonstration is how do you get across to the people outside of your demonstration what you're actually doing? So they're not just like, oh, those people are getting arrested. What's that about? If people don't know why you're doing what you're doing, you might as well not do it. The clarity of why you're there and what you're demanding, so that has to be simple and crystal clear, both to you and to the public. Using props or signs or banners or whatever to, again, make that crystal clear to the people you're confronting and the people walking by. So that was then, and here we are today. The world we inherit is shaped by the choices of those who came before us. And our world and the world our children will inherit is shaped by the choices that we do or don't make now. And not taking action, that is also a choice. We may not be able to do everything, but each of us can do our part. Where do you feel that inner nudge of that next right step you know in your heart you need to do or take? Together, our efforts can become the collective transformation that our age so desperately needs. So let us choose connection over isolation, courage over fear, and solidarity over cynicism. Let us trust that golden shadow within us is actually real. And let us step forward in whatever ways we are called to defend democracy, to protect the vulnerable, to build a world in which every person can live with dignity and hope.